Okay, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 19. I'm going to be talking about the decision of Pilate to crucify Jesus. To begin with, I'll start with a little bit of a review in order to establish what's happening. And I'm going to start in verse 10, I think. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 10. And here it says, "Then Pilate said to him," talking to Jesus, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" All right. And then in verse 11, Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Let me deal with the first part of verse 11, just a little bit of a review from the previous message, that you could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. All right. Now, the power that Pilate claimed, of course, was that, I have the power to execute you, to crucify you, or to release you. And Jesus said that this is a power that has been given to you from God. All right. Now, this is an open-ended statement. It's very easy for a person to read that and make all kinds of assumptions that may not have been intended. For example, just because a person is in power, in a position of power, that doesn't necessarily mean that God has decided that they specifically are to have this power. All right, this can be assumed quickly and easily. A person can just say, well, if I am in a position where I can decide to kill someone or let them go, well, then, God has given me this power because of the existence of me, because I exist, and because I'm in this position of authority, then obviously this is God-inspired. This is the decision of God. It's easy for a person to take that kind of a position. And I don't think that that's what Jesus was intending to say at all. I just do not. I don't see that. But I can understand, that some people can perhaps see something like this from there, or they want to see something like this from there. But Jesus was referring specifically to Pilate and to himself. All right? This was a specific circumstance. And to extrapolate this and to say that this is going to be true in all circumstances, then I think that's just going beyond what Jesus had to say here. But it can be quite tempting. The other thing that I really want you to notice is that the power that has been given by God is the power to choose. All right, that's the power. The power that God gave Pilate is the power to decide for himself. All right, this is not about, God has decided that Pilate will execute Jesus, or God has decided that Pilate will maybe let him go, and that all these things happen not because of the choice of a man, but because of the will of God. That there are people who really want to take the position that we don't have any choice in any decision, that the only thing that takes place, the only thing that happens is what God wills, what God decides will happen. There is no maverick molecule in the universe. There is no man who will make a decision outside of the approval and the desire and the decision of God. This is what most people in the Christian world would like to assert. I obviously do not share in this belief, but this is what people believe, and I have to say that this is common, and that I want to make it clear and obvious that I don't agree. I think that the empowerment was that God empowered Pilate to be able to decide for himself. What does he want to do? What is he really going to do? Okay, so that's the first part of verse 11. The second part, therefore the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. Now, in the previous message, I mentioned that, you should ask the Lord about this. And I want to emphasize that again. But I'll add a little bit to this to get you thinking about how God perceives the sins that are taking place. I want you to really consider this, because I think there's a lot that you can know about your God, about him as a person, through realizing what he just said. He said, okay, listen, murder is obviously wrong, and for Pilate to make the decision to crucify Jesus will be classified as a sin, all right, against that Pilate has committed. That the decision to perform this murder is what it becomes, because it's unjustifiable killing. All right. In this case, Pilate will definitely commit a sin. And we would think, murder, oh, that's the ultimate sin in a sense. And, I can appreciate the seriousness of it. However, what Jesus is expressing here is that those people outside who decided to use manipulation, dishonesty, and they're going to use extortion, all right, I'll show you that in a moment, in order to have Jesus murdered in this way, that God really considers that to be a more evil sin. Now, what is the core? What is really going on in the behavior, in the context of the behavior of these people? All right, now I would suggest, and of course give it some thought and look at it more, but to me, what grabs my attention the most is the dishonesty. All right, that's what grabs my attention the most. It is the measure of dishonesty. All right, and so what I'm suggesting is that the usage of dishonesty, of manipulation, maybe some combination of honesty and dishonesty, all right, but however this is done, in the end, if you were to look at the situation, or any situation for that matter, and ask the question, what would God really see here? Not what you would get from some kind of a courtroom experience, or by being able to manipulate or deceive another man who's established as a judge. And while there is a place for that, and there are reasons why we would have judges, you still have to acknowledge that they are not God. They are going to make poor decisions on occasion. They are subject to manipulation and deception and dishonesty. All right, but God looks at dishonesty, and he says, in this context, he says that is worse than murder, than ending a person's life here on earth. The expression of dishonesty and the decisions that follow from the dishonest expression of a person, from God's point of view, is more evil, much more evil than the murder itself. That's what we see here from what Jesus describes. He describes what he holds important, what he holds as being of value. Now, to us, our physical lives are of great value. I don't want to diminish that or depreciate that. I just want you to see that from his perspective, there is something that he considers to be of greater importance than death itself. All right, which of course is just a temporary transition from this life to the next in the kingdom of heaven and in eternity. All right, so this is what I want you to see from the second part of verse 11, and to really consider the implications of that. And if this is true, all right, embrace this within your own life, and take into consideration the value and the importance of living in the truth, not being manipulative, not being dishonest, not extorting people, or using blackmail as a way to manipulate and to influence someone into doing something that is outside of their willful, voluntary behavior. Okay? Never take away someone's willful, voluntary behavior, unless there is some extreme justification, and it needs to be done so with clarity and an openness and an honesty so that everybody has an understanding that this person's willful, voluntary behavior is going to be inhibited, and why. Okay, those are important things in order to establish healthy and sound relationships with other people and with the world that you're a part of. Okay, so Pilate has got to make a decision considering what is presented to him. From verse 12, it says, "From then on, Pilate sought to release him." Okay, from then on, when Jesus responded in the way that he did, Pilate made a decision. And his decision is, I need to find a way to let this guy go. That was his decision. At this moment, he decided Jesus needs to be released. Okay, that's what he needs. Now, what he should have done is he should have just released him. Right? I mean, if he's got absolute power, if he's got the power of the sword, just release him. Just let him go. Just end this and get him out of there. That would have been the right thing to do in his position. But instead, he's still got to go. He's still going to go, and he's going to try to reason with these people, who obviously cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, right? They're not going to feel any pity or any remorse for the pain and the suffering that they're going to cause, all right? And they're not going to stop until Jesus is dead, okay? I mean, that's what he's got to deal with these people. So let's proceed and go into verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend." Okay, whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. Well, let's start with that part first and go back to the idea of not being Caesar's friend. Okay, being a king, whoever makes himself to be a king speaks against Caesar, that's not true. That's not true. That's a lie. Right? There were lots of kings in that day and age. In that part of the world, many different kings. All right, and there were sovereign entities who made the decisions for their kingdom, and Caesar didn't make those decisions. And he didn't intervene or cause any disruptions because of those decisions. There were kings like that. So just being a king doesn't automatically mean you're speaking against Caesar. That doesn't mean that at all. Jesus was a king. He said he was from out of town, and he was there to just simply proclaim the truth. That was it. He was not there in order to oppose Caesar's authority. He was just there to tell the truth. Now, the truth might result in some sense of opposition, but that's something else. All right? And so Pilate is trying to let Jesus go, and the people declare to him, they inform him, they notify Pilate. We're going to give you a notification that, if anybody says that they're a king, well, then they're against Caesar. Well, that's not true. It's not true, but they said it. But I want you to understand that is not relevant to this scenario. What is relevant is what they said just before that, okay? And that is that if you let this guy go, you are not Caesar's friend. They went on and gave an example contrary, but it's not true and it's not real. But that's the point, is that they were willing to say something that was not true as part of declaring that you're not going to be Caesar's friend. All right? Now, the fact that it was a dishonest or irrelevant statement has relevance in this context, all right, in something else. In the context of we are willing to be dishonest. We are willing to say things that don't matter. We're willing to do that. We're going to do that. And we're going to say, maybe, that you're not Caesar's friend. Okay, now this changes things. Changes things a lot. All right, now Pilate did not want to crucify Jesus. He wanted to find some way to let Jesus go and also satisfy the crowd at the same time, for which there is no reconciliation that's going to happen there. But he was trying to find a way to do that. Okay? Now, if he lets Jesus go, there is the risk. All right? There's the risk that he will have made a decision. He will have let Jesus go. That could have been a bad decision. Could have been the wrong decision. Why? Because maybe Jesus would lead some kind of revolt or revolution, assert himself as the Messianic king in some way, and then he's going to have to explain to Caesar. He's going to have to explain to Caesar that that he let Jesus go, and then this is what followed. He's going to have to defend himself to Caesar because of the disruption that could take place if that happened. All right, so there is the risk that this could happen. So Pilate could make a bad decision in letting Jesus go because of the revolt that may transpire. That was a risk to him, but he did not consider that to be a big enough risk to crucify Jesus. All right, so while it was a risk, he's not going to do that. All right, now what they go for next, right? Because what that means is that Pilate could do something wrong, in which case he could be blackmailed. All right, he might let Jesus go, and then they could say, well, you made a really bad decision. We might send a notification to Caesar that you let this guy go, and so you made this bad decision. Now we're gonna blackmail you over this. If you don't do what we say, then we're gonna say this, and then we might cause a little bit of a revolt and say that Jesus is leading us, and we're gonna cause this kind of a disruption. You see, they could turn against Pilate in this kind of a context, and they are letting Pilate know that they're willing to use dishonesty and manipulation, or distortions of reality, distortions of the truth, in order to do what they want to do and to cause pain and suffering in Pilate's life, so crucify Jesus. So the risk of blackmail was present. Pilate did not give in to that. He still tried to let the people go. So they changed their approach, and they're now going to use extortion. All right, now the difference between blackmail and extortion is that blackmail is when you do something wrong, all right, and Pilate has not done anything wrong yet, but if he lets Jesus go, then he could be at risk for these kinds of blackmail scenarios. Extortion is you are going to do what we tell you to do, or we are going to hurt you. All right? So they're gonna change their approach and say, now Pilate, you're gonna kill this guy, because if you don't, we're going to hurt you. And this is how we're going to hurt you. We're going to send Caesar a notification and let him know that you didn't rule correctly here. You're not really Caesar's friend. Okay, so nothing will necessarily have happened through which he could be blackmailed, but it can be extorted. All right, he's going to be extorted by saying that we're going to notify Caesar that you're not his friend, and that Caesar had better replace Pilate before something awful happens. Okay? So this is the extortion that inspires Pilate to change his mind. Okay? So, while Pilate has this absolute power, right, this absolute power of being able to use the sword, he is still answerable to Caesar. And what they're suggesting is that we're going to use the power of Caesar in order to replace you, because we're going to, if you don't do what we say, we're going to go to Caesar and we're going to tell him whatever lies we have to. We're going to say whatever we have to say, whatever dishonesty that we need to express in order to replace you. And maybe your replacement will then kill Jesus, because it'll be kind of known that your replacement will show up, and we'll take him to the back room, or to use that expression, or we'll just send him a notification. We'll let him know that we replaced you, Pilate, with him because he wouldn't kill Jesus, because you wouldn't kill Jesus. So now he gets to have an opportunity to do that. And of course, if he doesn't, well, we're going to talk to Caesar again too, and we're going to say this guy isn't your friend either. And so just because a person has the power of the sword, or some absolute power like that, doesn't necessarily mean that they won't ever give in to extortion or blackmail if they make a bad decision. They may very well give in to extortion or blackmail just because they're afraid, just because the risks that they're dealing with would say that, the probability of there being less discomfort in my life would be to give in to the blackmail or the extortion. And in every civilization, all right, in every civilization that has risen and fallen, this kind of corruption has always transpired, and it always will. There's always going to be the extortion of the leaders, the blackmail of the leaders. All right, there's always going to be bribes. Well, hey, look, just make this decision. We'll give you a lot of money, or we'll give you something of value. We'll give you something. We'll do something for you, anything. Or there could be payoffs, all right, whereas the payoff is an indirect form of bribes. It will say something like, look, just make good decisions like this, and then one day later, we'll invite you over for a speaking engagement maybe, and we'll give you payment for speaking to us for an hour. It doesn't matter what you have to say. It'll just be enough money to maybe buy a house. That kind of payoff. Or when we decide to make certain business decisions, like who are we going to do business with? Who are we going to make contracts with in order to engage in something that produces money? Who's going to get the construction projects, for example? Stuff like that. We'll make business deals with you. We'll have a preference to doing business deals with you, so you can profit from the work that's being done, instead of somebody else. Those are payoffs, all right. And so through bribes, payoffs, extortion, blackmail, that is the core of the corruption of governments, all right. And it's always happened, and it always will. It will always exist in one form or another, because, like I said, people prefer the absolute power, but if they don't have that, then they will use the manipulation, the power of manipulation and dishonesty and these other tactics, because they are easier than being honest, truthful, and living on the basis of integrity. All right, it's easier to use those approaches, so people will always tend to take the path of least resistance or get involved in those things that are the easiest. All right, but that's what happens here. What happens here is extortion. That's what causes Pilate to change his mind. Okay, again in verse 12, from then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. All right, and during this time in history, just like about any other time in history, Caesar would have concerns about who is his friend and who is not, who is going to be loyal to him and who isn't. And if he finds out that there's anybody who is under his authority, who may not be as loyal as he would like, maybe because there was a recent incident, there was a recent incident where somebody's loyalty was a problem for Caesar. Hey, Caesar is a little extra sensitive to who his friends are right now. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Proceeding into verse 13. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. All right, so in verse 13, when Pilate heard that, okay, when he heard them saying, we are now going to use extortion against you. We're going to go against you. And you see how we are with Jesus, right? Do you really want to be our enemy too? We're going to go to Caesar over you. Okay. What do you do with people like this? You really have to protect yourself from people like this. There is no other way. You have to protect yourself from people like this, and don't let them have access to you, because this is what they're going to do to you. Any opportunity that they can take it, or any way that they can create it, it's just a dangerous world, all right? So this is what Pilate ends up doing. Verse 14, now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. I will come back to that in just a moment. And he said to the Jews, behold your king. All right, so after he heard, we're going to extort you, he says, okay, we're going to do this. And he does this in a formal way, in a public way. All right, he's going to make it absolutely clear that he is Caesar's friend, and that he's going to do what they want him to do, but he's going to do it in a way that they're not going to be able to easily blackmail him after he makes this bad decision. He's going to make a bad decision. He's going to subject himself to being blackmailed. So how is he going to, to manage this situation so that he can reduce the leverage of blackmail that can be placed upon him? All right. So what he's going to do is he's going to make this public. First and foremost, he's going to make it public. He's going to say, all right, this is what's going to happen. We're going to make it public. Bring Jesus out. Behold your king. Let's establish that right away. We are all going to agree that Jesus is the king. Okay? We're going to make that declaration. And then they're going to say, all right, well, that may be, but we're going to reject him as our king. All right, so we're conspiring together to say that he is the king and that he is being rejected as the king. Again, in verse 14, now it was the preparation day of the Passover. I'll come back to that. And about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? All right, is this going to be the decision? Will you accept this decision of crucifixion of your king? All right, we're going to make this clear that we have an act of sedition taking place. Is that going to be the decision? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. Then he delivered him to them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. All right, so as soon as they declared, we have no king but Caesar, then we are rejecting this guy as the king. We now have complete cooperation and recognition, and it's all public, that their testimony indirectly is that Jesus is committing sedition, so we are now going to crucify him for sedition. This is a bad decision. It's an evil decision, but it's a decision that everybody's making and that everybody is in agreement with among themselves, except for Jesus, of course, and probably others in the public. But this is a public declaration that Pilate is going to crucify Jesus for sedition because he has declared himself to be the king and this is testified of by these other people through their rejection of him as their king. That's how this gets coordinated. All right, now, Pilate is going to crucify an innocent man. He's making a bad decision, but he's made it a public one. All right, so that these people, if they go to Caesar and they say that Pilate executed an innocent man, well, there's going to be other witnesses who are going to be able to say, No, they did not see him as an innocent man. They saw him as someone who was guilty of sedition. All right, you see? So Pilate has been able to, through making this public, he's going to be able to protect himself from the blackmail that could result from him making a wrong decision. He's not able to protect himself from the extortion, because obviously these people are so dishonest that Caesar's going to make a decision against Pilate probably. So he's going to give into the extortion, but he's protecting himself from future blackmail. At least he can do that. So they led him away to be crucified. That's how this worked out. These were the decisions of the people who were here. It was not a decision of God. Okay? These were the decisions of these people. God gave them the power to decide, but they were the ones who decided. Okay, let's move forward a little bit into verse 17. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Okay, so Pilate just had a public trial. All right, everybody is publicly declaring that Jesus is guilty of sedition by claiming to be a king, and everyone is rejecting Jesus, and we're going to crucify him. It's a public event. In addition to this, Pilate writes a sign, okay, posts a sign. And this, again, is to protect himself from the blackmail that could transpire. A public sign, Jesus, the King of the Jews. Okay, so it's clear he's crucifying the king who would be guilty of sedition. All right, he's making this a public event and is documenting it, not just for the people who were there present at the Roman compound, but this is also going to be the documentation for the rest of the population, for everybody else, for all those people who were not present. Okay, so that everyone would know that there is a decision that is made according to Roman law, that Roman law was violated through sedition. All right, so what happens? Verse 20, then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Pilate is making this a public event in all the languages so that everybody's going to be clear on this issue. In verse 21, therefore the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but he said, I am the King of the Jews. All right, now if Pilate changes the sign to he said that he was the King of the Jews, well, now that's different. Okay? There's a big difference between he is the king and he said he was the king. All right? I mean, if he said he was the king, so what if he says that? So he's a crazy person. We could say that. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is guilty of an act of sedition by just saying, I am the King of the Jews, or I am the Son of God. All right? That's not going to do it. And so if Pilate changes the sign to he said that he was the King of the Jews, well, then Pilate could be subject to blackmail because he made an illegitimate decision. He made a decision that would be contrary to Roman law. So he's not going to change that because he's going to put himself in a situation where he could be subject to blackmail. All right? Now, in addition to that, they said, that he said that he was the King of the Jews. In addition to that, according to the laws of the Sanhedrin, no one could ever be punished for any crime by their own testimony. That was in accordance with the laws of the Sanhedrin that are consistent with the laws that God gave, that there needed to be 2 or 3 witnesses to the crime, all right? And not just, and that the person themselves cannot testify against themselves. One of the reasons why is because they could be suicidal, and this is just a convenient way to get themselves killed, to do something that would result in your death. So you're suicidal, and it's a little inconvenient to kill yourself, so have somebody else do it for you. Just claim to have committed some kind of a crime that's worthy of death. So in order to protect the people who are suicidal, the Sanhedrin declared that no one was to ever be convicted or punished by their own testimony. You're never allowed to testify against yourself, or any testimony that you exercise against yourself is never to be considered as part of the decision that would be made. In addition to that, you could be trying to protect somebody else who committed the crime. All right, there's somebody else who may have committed the crime who is very important to you, and you don't want that person to suffer the consequences of the crime, and so you claim that you committed that crime, and then in that way you're protecting the other person. All right, now these kinds of people, what they'll do is they'll protect themselves. They'll commit a crime, and then they'll say that you did it. This is the exact opposite. But this is how people were protected according to the laws of the Sanhedrin. So Pilate cannot change the sign to he said he was the king of the Jews, because that would be suggesting that Jesus was crucified by his own personal testimony. All right? And this could be the cause, or a cause for a revolt. Maybe the chief priests would then be able to rally all the people together and say, you see, the Romans have crucified an innocent person. They've crucified, and they wanted him dead anyway. But now that he's dead, let's use it. Let's use it and use it in order to inspire some kind of a revolt maybe, or other things, cause a disruption, maybe blackmail Pilate, because, Pilate will give them some additional money if they calm down and not follow through with the revolt that they're starting to stir up, right? This is how people are. So, Pilate cannot trust these people. He can't trust these people to believe or to do anything one way or the other, one way or the other. Pilate has to make decisions that exclusively protect himself from either direction that these people might go. Because, of course, it is well known and understood that these people cannot be trusted under any conditions or circumstances whatsoever. If they're the kinds of people who would do something like this to an innocent person. All right? Okay, so what does he say? In verse 22, Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." That's it. What I've written, I've written. I've done that. He has done that. That is the end of his actions, the end of his willful, voluntary behavior. He has done that, and he's done that mainly to protect himself. All right, one more little detail considering what was written here. Let's go back up to the issue of the Passover. This is found. What verse was this at? I moved ahead. There we go. Up here in verse 14. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover in about the 6th hour. All right, to say the preparation day of the Passover, this is an opportunity to have a little bit of confusion, because the Passover meal was just held the evening before. That was what Jesus was having with his disciples. So you're not going to prepare to have the Passover, after you just had the Passover. Okay, so what is this referring to? This is referring to the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That was what this was referring to. And I could point out, I'm not going to do that right now, but if you do a study of these words, Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, in the scriptures, you'll find in the Gospels that these words were effectively used synonymously. They were used synonymously because it was just a separation of 24 hours. And so it was all part of the same festivities in that sense. The only difference, of course, is that there better not be any lamb left over. No lamb leftovers from the evening before, because that would be a violation of the laws of Passover. And so when they had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they had it with other foods besides lamb, because of the risk that maybe you got some leftovers from the night before. So the preparation day had to do with preparing the food, preparing the meal that was going to be held that evening, which was the celebration of the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And this was known as the Passover Seder. The Passover Seder meal was held at this time. It was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where it's a big deal. It's a huge event that unfolds because the law allows you to prepare food as an exception for this Sabbath day. All right, so there's a lot to say about it. You have to study the law concerning Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the exception of being able to prepare food, which of course they prepared a lot of food. If you were to look at the Passover Seders, you see there's a lot of food involved, and it's a lengthy process, lengthy experience, but that's what they were preparing for when it refers to the Passover preparation. All right, that these two words were being used synonymously at this time in history. And today, the Passover meal has been effectively replaced and forgotten, whereas today, for the most part, people are just participating in the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and they're calling that Passover. All right, I have a question for you, for those of you who are using this for your home Bible studies. This is a different kind of a question. What is the highest position of public authority you would like to have? It's just an off question, but it's related to this section. If you were to have a public position of authority where you would be making decisions that would affect other people, what is the highest position you think you'd like to have? All right. And what I mean by that kind of a question is, would you consider the importance of that kind of authority, and what would happen if you were blackmailed or extorted or bribed or offered payoffs in order to make bad decisions to use that authority inappropriately? All right, so which would be the highest position that you would be willing to have to put yourself at risk of being manipulated into making bad decisions while you were in that position? Okay, I think this is kind of a fun question to ask more than anything, and to have a conversation about it, to understand that every governmental system is going to become corrupted to some extent when it comes to these circumstances. All right, now in having this kind of a conversation and in presenting this question, what I'd like you to follow it up with and to understand is that regardless of how bad, how corrupt the infrastructure is that you're a part of, okay, no matter how corrupt your civilization is at your time in history, I want you to consider that even in the midst of all of that, you can still be a part of what God is doing. All right, and that God can still do his work in the midst of all the corruption that is taking place. In fact, in some situations, you may be able to consider that in some situations, the pain and the suffering that results can cause inspiration or create new opportunities for God to be able to establish relationships with other people who are in the midst of these kinds of situations in life. All right, and so I think this is a good, a good thing to consider in terms of a conversation if you follow it through all the way, to realize that in the midst of all the corruption and all the complications and dysfunction and difficulties, there can still be an opportunity for God to do his work. And to remember also that these wicked, evil people, the people who do not know God or the people who reject God, these are the people who we're hoping to convert, that these people may repent and obey the gospel and believe their God. and make a decision to become born again by the Spirit and become a different person. Now, like I said, it's very difficult. I've said this previously. It's very difficult for people to pursue this because it is not the easy way. Okay? It is not the easy way. It is the hard way. All right? But the hard way, in this sense, to know your God gives you something of greater value than you could ever achieve or experience in your life here in the world. All right? And you just have to trust and believe that that's going to be the case, because until you experience it personally, you'll never really know it. I can testify of it myself, but for you to really know it yourself, you have to trust me, and you have to pursue a life of truth, a life of honesty, of integrity, and of reality in the relationship that your God wants to have with you and to have with the world that you're a part of. All right? And then once you are into it, one day, I believe that you will see that the life of truth and integrity and honesty is the better way to go. All right? So I will continue in the next message, and I hope you guys have a good conversation with this kind of a question. Thanks.